Good afternoon to all of you. I'm Patricia Ruiz-Healy. I'm the director of the gallery, and I'm here just to present Patty Ortiz and Jesse Amado, who doesn't need a presentation. But just to tell you briefly, Patty Ortiz, you know so much about her, but she has had an illustrious life as an artist and as an arts administrator. She was born here in San Antonio, has a BFA from the University of Texas in Austin, and then an MFA from the University of Texas in San Antonio. We lost her. She went to Colorado for a few years, and we got her back in 2009. And she's now retired from arts management, and she's working full-time as a curator, independent curator and artist. So we're very thrilled to have her and for her to write the wonderful essay for Jesse's catalog. So this show is really fantastic for the gallery. We're very happy, and so it's going to be just a dialogue between Patty and Jesse. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Patricia. Actually, thank you so much for inviting me to do this and to write the essay. Jesse, actually, I know Jesse before I knew Jesse. In Denver, he's so well known nationally and probably internationally for his work. I had seen his work. I'd actually curated his work in Denver several times at the museums I worked for, and I'm still doing that. Mostly because I really see Jesse as a contemporary, very now thoughtful artist. I think it's a hybrid artist now that we are dealing with now, because there's so many variables and so much things to think about, and Jesse still holds on to all those things, which I think is really beautiful. I want to start with, before we start talking about this series, Jesse, I do want to start with something that I think is so important, and I notice immediately about you now, knowing you as an artist and a person, is that your art and your life are like, there's no boundary, I don't think. It's so much a part of your life, and I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I think you've talked to me about it a little bit, and I think it's really, really important.
Okay, sure. That's kind of hard to pinpoint in a lot of ways. Where did it start? Where is it going to end? But let's just go back 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, there were some extenuating circumstances, and I became ill. And so once that happened, then everything just changed. There was a whole different perspective. And so what I found out was that I just wasn't, I didn't have the strength or capabilities of working on art anymore. I just was not in the mood, to tell you the truth. And so, so I shut things down. After being a studio artist for over 25 years, I decided I wasn't going to have a studio anymore, and I just started focusing on my health. And then so, you know, that's part of the story too. And so I ended up going home, and it was time to, you know, start making art. At one point I felt that I was ready and wanted to, and I commenced doing that, and since I didn't have a studio anymore, I began everything there at the house where I lived. And so as time went on, I learned and I discovered that there was something about going back and going home and working there again, and something I hadn't done probably since an undergraduate, actually. And so it was interesting to be able to come full circle, if, you know, pardon that, but it's kind of happened that way. And once it became part of my lifestyle, more integral than ever before, because I was always pretty diligent. I always spent a lot of times in the studio anyway. And so I was spending that time in the house as well. And just being able to be that close to the work all the time made a difference. And there was always an attention that I didn't have before to the work. you know, wake up and you see it. And so that was kind of interesting to be involved in that process. I mean, suddenly...
It's almost like a relationship that you were having with...
Yeah, it was. No, that's true, and a relationship is always really, really important. I always try to have a close a relationship as I can to, you know, any aspect of my work. I mean, like materials, I try to get as close a relationship to materials as I possibly can when that has to occur. So...
So it seems like you're thinking about it all the time. I mean, even the colors you choose on your sofa, to the table, to the kitchen.
Absolutely.
It's like, I don't know, it seems very, it's not calculated, but it seems very sensitive. You're very sensitive to that.
Right, absolutely. And it's just something that I've always felt strongly about. I forget the name of the Victorian wallpaper maker, but, you know, English, but he felt that everybody had, you know, the right to live in a beautiful environment. He felt that beauty was an unalienable right. And so I've always felt that way, and I feel that now that I've gone through this process, this creative, you know, this altered creative process, that, you know, what I expected from the intended the intention was to sort of, you know, reveal once again what I feel, that's very same notion, what I feel that every human being really wants, you know, it's a primal, almost a primal need to want to be around, you know, visually pleasing things. Yeah. Yeah. And so this was a way of really practicing that, you know, intensely. And so, yeah, this might sound ridiculous, but like every day when I get up in the morning, I make my bed a different way. Because, you know, it's a format, you know, the bed is a format, and you know, I have a sheet and a blanket and a couple of pillows and cushions, and all those become components, you know, so every day, every day it's different, you know, the pillow might be in this corner instead of, you know, on top of the other pillows. So that's kind of how I start my day, and I sort of, you know, get into that mode right off the bat, you know. And so I'm constantly going through my environment, and just, you know, making this little adjustments, so to speak. I don't know.
So let's go right into this. You mentioned the altered art process or phase, which I'm assuming you're talking about this phase.
Yeah.
You want to go right into that?
Yeah, manifesting.
How this all kind of developed?
Well, it all sort of developed just from a personal experience, actually. You know, medication, pharmaceuticals, someone very close to me becoming depressed. You know, conversation turned into one about should I or should I not take, you know, antidepressants, and so I started becoming, you know, much more interested in that and doing my, you know, just doing investigations and finding out, you know, a fuller range, you know, just seeing this full range of consequences that, you know, result from pharmaceuticals, and just, you know, looking at them, you know, going through a whole list of images of pharmaceuticals and how they're shaped and how they're colored, and so there's that, right? There's that marketing angle to the colors that are used in pharmaceuticals in order to, you know, make them attractive to someone. So there was that, and then there's the shape, and then there's an alternative to depression, and the wonderful stories that I read about that. And for instance, there was this Army officer who West Point graduate, distinguished officer, but he was depressed, and every day you think about committing suicide. And the only time he discovered that he didn't think about these things was when he was training, because he was in special forces. So during training and all that physical exertion, he wasn't bothered by those, you know, those depressive feelings. And so what he ended up doing was he left the Army and he joined the French Foreign Legion, which has, you know, the reputation of having the harshest, you know, training methods, you know, in the world, you know, standing in the rain for days or whatever it is. So after 2 years, he cured himself of the depression. He no longer thought about, you know, committing suicide and you know, and having, you know, those depressive thoughts and those feelings. But of course, he wants to come back to the United States, and the Army wants to, you know, court-martial him, you know, if he comes back. So anyway, maybe that'll put him right back into a depression anyway. But so there are alternatives. You know, the French, they have a dating site, they say, and they market it by saying that, you know, don't be depressed, don't take antidepressants, get yourself a mistress or a lover, and you'll feel much better. So there's just...
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever it takes. So maybe, so my modest proposal, you know, ultimately my modest proposal is that by looking at the work, this work in particular, my work, really art in general, that it can possibly make you feel better, and maybe there won't be a need for a pharmaceutical. That is my modest proposal, my conceit, okay? And so...
so there's a comparison between drug experience and an art
yeah.
experience.
I mean, this is my placebo, okay? You know, and so, and that's kind of where it starts, and that's kind of where it ends, maybe. And so, once all that was established, and then having this material at hand, and discovering that this material, which is a familiar material with me, when I went to the Philadelphia Fabric Workshop, I worked with this kind of felt this thick, but it only came in black, white, and gray. And so now I discovered that you can get it in this 30-color palette, you know, that's made in France. It's 100% virgin wool, as you know, noted. It's, you know, an old material. It's an ancient material.
Did you try it in other materials before you settled on the, you know, on the felt, or were you just struck first with the felt?
This particular time, I had the material first. I had the felt first, and this is carpeting material. And when I would go to this flooring company to buy this paint that I, you know, use, I noticed this, and so I started looking at the samples, and then I ordered some, and then, you know, I kept it for a while, and many months, and then, you know, looking for something to use this material with. And then, you know, then all those, and then the other things occurred, the other occurrences happened, and so suddenly, you know, that was foremost in my mind, and so it all just sort of, you know, converged, and there I was, you know, cutting these half moons out of, you know, the swaths of felt that I was getting.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that half moonness, because to me it's very much about the color studies of Joseph Albers and just this whole notion of that edge between the two differences of color and what happens to your eyes optically.
Right. I mean, yeah, optically, the physics that occurs, and also the psychological aspect of it, and also, like I mentioned earlier, the you know, the colors that are employed by the pharmaceuticals in order to make them, you know, that much more attractive, the pills.
The kind of candy colors?
Yeah, the candy colors and all that. And so, and I refer to them half moon only because, you know, when I get the template made, that's how they refer to it. You know, I go in there, I said, I need another half moon, and know exactly what I'm talking about. That's what they call it. So I like that half moon because, you know, they're circles, and circles are, you know, it's the sun, it's the earth, it's the moon, it's a lot of things in nature. You know, it's not necessarily a man-made shape. You know, it's not a cube.
But it's also
not
the circles, your optical view
the eye,
too. Yeah.
the eye as well. So there is, you know, all that plays into it, and I mean, it's not that I'm thinking about these things specifically when I'm making these things, but I know that they occur some way. You know, our collective consciousness, you know, brings all these things to a fore, and of course, you know, I'm part of that collective consciousness, so it does come about. And so between that and Damien Hirst making his dot drawings, dot paintings of pharmaceuticals, so this is my contribution to all that, to Ross Bleckner's dots and his dots, and there is a reference for me specifically to Matisse, and when he became bedridden and picked up a pair of scissors and colored paper and started cutting out these amazing shapes, and having his assistant pin them to the wall as he composed that way. And so, right. And so therefore, so that, explains the pins that I utilized. I wanted to also pin things up on a wall.
Yeah.
And so that is part of it. Yeah.
So now, but there's also a really interesting placement of these pills in this repetitive form, in this bigger plane that is created in these, where it is kind of obviously references the 30-day prescription or the dosages that you are being told to give, that there's more than one element to it. And what's funny is, if someone buys one circle, are they going to need to buy another? No, I'm just kidding. In order to keep that dosage
Well,
up.
that's all part of the strategy.
But can you talk a little, because that whole notion of repetition of form, I think, is something you've always utilized.
Yeah, I mean, I look very, deeply and ardently and intently at minimalism, and so that, these are Donald Judd's, and I remember my earliest conceit was that when I first started making art, that I would replace all Donald Judd's work with my work. And so, I was foolishly saying those things, but, that's kind of how I would look at things.
Put it out in the universe.
Yeah, and so minimalism, of course, is very foremost, and there are tropes and their devices of repetitiveness, making, repetition a part of it. And so, whatever repetition means to it, an individual. And in my case, it was just, making dosages.
Yeah, and I think
tablets.
The repetition makes the viewer almost bring in their human, consciousness into it, because it is so formalized that you have to, like start playing with colors or start seeing the differences within the two, and you bring in that human choice
right
to it.
Right.
So let's go right down to then the bad trips. I like to call them bad trips. You call them consequences. How did that happen? Was that an accident?
Yeah. Yeah, another one of those happy accidents that happens within the creative process. And, I believe in that process, the creative process, being about play. And I'm not the only artist that thinks that way and relies on that. But, even Sigmund Freud wrote papers about that, the similarities between play and the creative act. And so within that play that happens, these kind of things can occur, and this is certainly an example of that. And as I was cutting out these half moons, I would go to that one swath, and then I would just toss it off to the side in a corner as a scrap, essentially. And then they start piling up, and they start looking pretty good, And so I picked them up and started playing with those, and they became components. And then I thought, well, maybe these are the consequences. They can stand as metaphors for the consequences of the pill, because the pill can do wonders, for depression. But at the same time, they can be abused, and once that happens, then other, interesting things, occur. Lives can be destroyed, changed for the worse, etc. So there is that element. It's pharmaceuticals. All of us here have taken drugs one way or the other. So we're all familiar with the drug experience. Just from medicines, medications, food, the air we breathe, the water we drink. Speaking of, I will talk about that, but from here, Patty has curated a show at the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, and so, the request was that I do something like this, maybe on the floor, So I started doing my research, and it turns out that Boulder Creek was one of two locations in the United States that was picked where they could do studies of the fish. And they discovered that the fish have traces of antidepressants in them. So the fish on Prozac. And so that just comes from the, the runoff, I'm taking antidepressants, I need to take a pee, and so, suddenly there's traces of antidepressants, in the water. So it's not just us, but it's the fish too.
We started a huge scandal in Boulder.
Good, let's do that. Anyway, so it's prevalent, and it's an industry, and it's $1 billion, industry, if not $1 trillion industry. So, I mean, those kind of things interest me.
Well, I also love the fact that you do that kind of research, that it's not only a study of color and form and materiality and historical movements, and you're talking to Donald Judd and all these folks at once, but you're also looking at current events. I mean, like all your reading from the newspapers to whatever you're doing, it all becomes capsulized into this capsule.
I feel I'm a citizen of the world, and so now as an artist living in this day and age, I feel like you're being asked as an artist and really as a citizen, a global citizen, to kind of do this, kind of look this way, stretch out, have, this broad horizon, as opposed to before, the artist was always looking inward, for inspiration, and so now it's like this, and so, I like that. I like being informed. It's, yeah, sure,
No quote on that. That's great. That you think, I really truly see that artists have a huge responsibility to have a conversation not only to their what's going on in their heads and their personal experience and what's going on the canvas or paper, but it's also what's going on globally. And a conversation with artists now in Japan, I know.
Exactly. It's no longer just introspective,
Do you do a lot of studying that way in terms of what's going on contemporary art-wise?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I try to keep up as much as I possibly can. And, today I read about Grayson Perry, and he had some interesting things about why he dresses up like he does. A heterosexual man dresses up like a woman and does what he does. And, I like the things that he says about art, and it's subversive. And I guess it's a roundabout way of maybe answering the question previously about why all this happens. And it's just a desire, an intention to find, to give the work meaning. It's meaningful, and so that's important.
Yeah, and accessible too. I think that's a shift that happened in the last probably 2 or 3 decades.
Well, I guess, whatever it is, you just involve yourself long enough in this process that those things just almost become second nature in a way. That's one of the things that again, the full circle thing, that I've discovered, that here I am making work where my instincts are at the fore, and I am very confident about them because I feel after 30 plus years of making art that my instincts are pretty good. They should be anyway. And so I rely on the instincts a lot, more about the natural than the nurtured thing, rather let the sensory, play a big part, instead of, just having, lots of information, lots of techniques, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's a lot more to talk about, but I thought maybe we could start the conversation so it becomes a bigger table here. If anybody has a question, feel free to.
By all means.
Stay on it.
Give me a break.
No, you still have to.
I know.
Respond.
Okay.
Does anybody have a quick question?
Dan.
So you're saying that you decided not to take antidepressants?
No, it wasn't me. It was someone close to me that was depressed.
So
Yeah.
you had
So.
a direct experience.
Right. Someone very close to me, and so close enough where it makes a difference in my life, or it affects my life. So there was that. Yeah.
Your doctors ever recommended did you take antidepressants? Did your doctors tell you were being treated? Did they ever recognize that?
No, no. I joined the French Foreign Legion, and I did that, instead of,
Meaning you were a fireman for, is that what you
Well, no, you know what? I was retired as a fireman when I got cancer, but I did, I did go back to that time, because there were probably a handful of times where I was face to face with that specter. I had plenty of glimpses of mortality when I was in the fire department, so I knew what death was like. I knew what it smelled like. I knew what it looked like. I knew what it felt like, and it was certainly there, when I was in that battle. But I think it helped me, to confront it, actually. And then it was also an unusual circumstances in that I was staying in Linda Pace's apartment, or exhibition space. Her apartment was on the lower floor, and I was on the upper floor in the exhibition space. They had a corner apartment there where I stayed while I was doing the installation of her memorial at the library. Hills was there; he can tell you. And so that was an interesting way of going through it as well. Waking up early in the morning and walking into the middle of the gallery and looking at the Glen Ligon, and I don't know, there was something in the Glen Ligon that was like looking at an altar, let's say.
Right, but do you still feel that that's very much part of your life, this kind of repetition of behaviors then? That you keep this certain, like, I wake up at this time, I eat this kind of regimen?
It's not a regiment. It's just, I don't know, just an emergence of some kind. But no, it's not really a regiment. But that was just, that was going on. And so, and then later on, this happens, and so I feel that probably had an influence into that, into this. And so it's interesting, it's my, I don't know, third, certainly not my second act. I think it's beyond that. It might be my third or fourth act, or, and seeing that Matisse show, they refer to it as the late works, the late works of an artist, the crowning work that, will crown his career.
Well, I have another hard question. Because in some of these pieces, particularly these, you start doing this kind of decorative elements within the pills. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that evolved? Can you talk a little about that?
Well, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. I think maybe, just to strive for beauty is
so it's just more of your play with color and shape and form?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, you spend a lot of time looking at these and rearranging them and seeing, what works best, and relying again on your sensories, perceptions, feelings about things, just looking at them and say, well, this feels right, Or if it doesn't feel right, you rearrange them once again until it feels right. And so I was going for that feeling.
So in a way, it is again like the trip where it's getting a little bit more sparkly.
Could be.
Because there's a little more happening in your field of vision.
Yeah, it's
on the edge.
It's coursing through your body at a pretty good rate, and so you can expect those kind of things to happen too. So so this placebo was working pretty good for me too, let's say, and. So, I don't know. I mean, I've lived long enough, and I've come to this point where those things are okay, and you allow them to happen, and you become very, I mean, they're just so familiar, and you feel very confident about them, and you don't suppress them, and you allow it to happen. And
so one other thing, because one thing we didn't talk about, and I think it's really worth mentioning, are the rugs.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're doing that also in Boulder, where you're going to create this large rug installation, and you're saying that people are able to walk on these things.
Yeah, it's carpeted material.
So.
After all, ultimately.
And I loved your comment about, you feel it, and it's a sensual experience, and
Yeah.
you speak about it very
Yeah.
much like a drug
Well,
dealer. No.
Well, yeah.
Come on in.
Or a pharmaceutical salesman, same
Pharmaceutical
thing.
salesman.
Drug dealer, pharmaceutical salesman, same thing. No, it's just that it's an incredibly sensuous material, and I did a hallway. I carpeted a hallway with this material, and I have a couple of rugs in my bedroom, that I walk on them, stand on them, and it's nice to walk barefoot on them. It really is. It feels really, really good.
Do you see yourself going more in that direction, or is it just a response to the whole?
No, it's just a response to what it is, the material. It's carpeted material. Why not make rugs?
Yeah.
And so let's see what that looks like. And so you do it, and I kind of liked it, and so there's a possibility of doing more of that. We'll see after, after Boulder. See how that works out. So figure it out. Have people walk on it. Next time we'll carpet this whole place with this material.
Nancy?
I wanted to ask something about the colors and how you made choices of what color to put next to the other color. And then your arrangement here, will it be the same the next time you exhibit these pieces?
Probably not.
Okay.
I would think that it would all change, and so I expect it to be that way. I expect it to change, only because, I change my mind all the time, from one day to the next. So I'm not going to be that, hard on myself and say, no, it's got to be this way, it's got to be this way.
Would you juxtapose the colors in a different way?
I do. I go with the color, I do. I squint my eyes after a while, and the contrast looks good. First of all, if the color looks good, juxtaposed with the other colors, and then after that, I go with the value. If the bright, the darker, that's kind of nice to have as well. So there's always that dissonance that becomes resonance, if you can follow that. You start out and you start putting these things in front of you, and there's a lot of dissonance, and it's like just noise maybe, and then you start composing, and after a while you have a nice little love ballad or something, let's call it. It's just you put all those various notes together and you come out with a tune, instead of just noise, kind of like that. And so, one of the things I do remember, when I started these, one of the things that happened is I was listening to this beautiful classical piece. It was really, really beautiful. And I was so overwhelmed by it, and I loved it, and I was in the car. And then at the end, they announced the title, and it was Homesickness. And I thought, oh my God, I never thought about homesickness, but I still loved the song. It didn't matter. And that's one of the things that I envy a lot of times about music, is that, it's just beautiful sound, and there's no real cognitive, whatever it is that makes you, what do I know about notes, music notes? I don't. I just know that something sounds really great. And so that really played on me. And every once in a while, I like to listen to music that doesn't have words, And so maybe I was trying to be devoid of words, by doing these two. But then it always comes back to language, always. Language is so powerful, and I've sold my ideas using language, and Procter & Gamble uses their words to sell their soap, so it's never, I don't know, it never ends, But those are some of the things that I think about anyway.
Tomas.
Tomas, yes.
And it's been positive for conversation. You could posit that a lot of art is a continuum between purity and contamination. that is a purity of the form and the contamination of things like biography or autobiography. And it seems that this work is part of that continuum of both. Do you see, because obviously it was inspired by biographical things,
a personal. Yes.
But it's put into a formal context. How do you see that in your work? I mean, in this work, in this series?
Well, I guess the best answer I can give you is that I've always been interested in, I don't know, some things that are universal, and so, and I probably don't even know what that means, but anyway, I'm still interested in that. And I want someone from halfway around the world, I want a South Korean to see this and know it and like it and understand it, and that it doesn't have to be specific, to a geographical or political or economical, setup of some kind. That, someone half around the world can also live with these and love them and, be glad that they have them around. And so.
But I do think what Tomas is saying is that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Tomas, is that for so long, it was so very formal, and until recently, I think artists are bringing it back to be more accessible and more about not every day, but anybody can grab onto your circle when you say it's a pill, and then it's almost an entry point into the color, the texture, the surface, the felt, the references, and everything starts happening, which is what artists have been wanting to do for many decades.
Yeah.
And you have, it's something that's very true, I think, about all your work, is have the ability to bring it to your personal life, but also make it universal, what you're saying, or accessible, or is that?
Yeah, it's a question also, maybe it's a red herring to make the separation, because on the one hand you have a circle which is universal, but you also have experience which is universal. And so in some ways it's embedded in the form and content right there. It's not separate, it's part of it. So because I'm playing with the idea that it doesn't have to be that the impurities or the contamination that people have really made us, purities when you're just on the form and content, and contamination when you put stuff into that has something to do with the real world. But it seems to me that you can do both, and this is maybe a part of that.
Nice balance.
Yeah.
Well, how about that? I mean, really, I don't know. I'm just.
Which I think is all part of your life and art.
Humanity is.
You're so it's inherently in your process that it's about what you do and think about. And articles you read get drawn into the work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I feel that I'm a lot more open about my life and than I ever have been before, and that's kind of interesting, to realize that about myself. A lot of times I hear myself saying these things, like right now, I hear myself saying these things, and I almost don't recognize that voice because it's a voice that I haven't used so openly before, and so maybe I'm just still trying to figure it out, Tomas. I'm not really sure, and this is, and so I guess maybe I'm just trying to say I don't always have the answers, and I'm just, once again, those instincts are what I rely on, and it's okay. I remember, that's what I, relied on when I started making art. I just had been exposed to it. I knew it a little bit, and I knew what I liked, and so I just relied on those things a lot. And then, I would be asked to talk about it, and I didn't know what to say, really. And then I discovered that if I started to use scholarly terms, art speak, let's say, that I would lose my audience. And so at one point, when I really saw that and realized that, and almost was like really frustrated with myself for doing that, then I started telling stories about the work, you know, and so here I am telling that story once again, and it seems like the audience is you know, can relate, you know, it's easier for an audience, you know, to relate to that, and so I like to bring it back, you know, to that actually aspiration, not so much, you know, bring it down to that level, but just bring it up to that level, and so I don't know. I guess it's just a celebration of being a human and having experiences. And you and I, everybody here, you know, we deal in the visual language. And so I use that language, you know, to make an expression, to make a comment, to, you know, address something, compliment someone, try and seduce someone, you know. Use that visual language that I know so well, that I love, you know.
Well, it's complicated and it's completely simple, and that's what the lovely thing about it, Jesse. And I don't know if anybody else has any questions. I think our time's almost up.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Ken has a question.
oh, Ken.
I actually just have an observation, Jesse, and it's a fundamental question too, is that you've pretty much oriented every circle in a vertical division right down the middle. Right. Which to me, it seems figurative.
It is.
And
Yeah, absolutely right.
Left and right and everything.
Absolutely.
And I can just imagine if it was the other way, it would be landscape.
Yeah.
It would be landscape. It would be
So
the
you
horizontal.
did that on purpose? And kind of worked with that?
Yes, that was intentional to do it that way. Yeah. So there's, you know, those little tropes and devices and conventions that, you know, are, you know, they're universal in a way. I think they're understood that way because it holds you there. You know, the vertical holds you there.
Dan, you have a question?
Well, you talked about using soft material in sculpture and things like that. Really, to me, these circles are neither paintings nor sculpture. There's somewhere in between.
I don't know. It's art, you know, and that's what I aim for. If it becomes sculpture, if it becomes painting, I don't know. I thought of them in a lot of ways about as paintings, you know, very much so, just because of the color involved. And so I was making a lot of decisions based on that, you know, how a painter would think about these colors and how he would utilize them as well. But then, you know, I've always been really, really interested in gravity, you know, using that as a force in my work. And so this material is very conducive to that. I mean, look here what gravity does to these, you know, or does to this tongue over here and how that flaps over. And so at that point, you know, the synthesis, not the analysis, but the synthesis of the work, you know, becomes once again, you know, a consideration of gravity. And so then it becomes sculpture, I guess. The art becomes sculpture.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Jesse and Patty.
Oh,
Really.
thank you, Jesse. That was fun.
Good.
Good. Thank you.